Have you ever doubted someone who loved you just because you were hurt before? What if a man worth millions chose to live like he had nothing for an entire year? And one night, he brought the woman he loved into his small, broken house just to see if she would leave. But what she did next was something he never saw coming. If it were you, would you stay or walk away? There are men who don't raise their voices not because they are calm, but because they've learned being heard doesn't mean being understood. Ethan Cole was one of them. Or at least that's the name people knew, because Ethan Cole wasn't his real name. His real name was Ethan Blackwell, and in Chicago, that name carried weight, old money, new power, the kind of legacy that didn't need introductions. At 38, Ethan was the CEO of Blackwell Freight Systems, a logistics company valued at over $80 million. He was 6'1". Lean controlled the kind of man who walked into a room and people adjusted. Without realizing why not, would not flashy, just precise. But there was something else about him. Something most people couldn't quite explain. A distance not cold, not arrogant, just measured like every word had already been tested before it left his mouth. Because Ethan didn't trust easily anymore. And that didn't happen overnight. It happened slowly, quietly, twice. The first time was Laura. They met before the company became what it was, back when success still felt uncertain. Back when late nights meant building something, not maintaining it. Laura was easy to love. She laughed often, paid attention to small things, remembered how he liked his coffee. Said she admired his drive. And more importantly, she said she admired him. Not his money. Not his potential, just him. And Ethan believed her. He really did. Until the quarter. Everything shifted. A major contract fell through. Cash flow. Tightened expenses had to be cut. No more luxury dinners. No more spontaneous flights out of the city. Just work. Just pressure. Just reality. And that's when things changed. Not all at once, that would have been easier. It was slower. Colder. Laura stopped asking about his day. Stopped staying late. Started talking about stability. About future security. Words that sounded reasonable but felt different, distant. 3 months later, she was gone. No fight. No scene. Just absence. Like something quietly removed from his life. And Ethan understood he always did. The second time hurt in a different way, because it wasn't obvious her name was Vanessa, and Vanessa was careful smart. She didn't complain, didn't demand, didn't pull away when things got hard. Instead, she leaned into his world, his clients, his meetings, his network. At first, it felt like partnership, like she was building something with him, supporting him, standing beside him, until Ethan started noticing small things, the way she introduced herself using his name, the way she remembered people who mattered to his business, but not things that mattered to him. And then, one night at a dinner event, he watched her walk across the room. Not toward him, but toward an opportunity, a connection, a door. She wanted opened, and suddenly everything made sense. She wasn't in love with him. She was in love with access. Access to rooms she couldn't enter. Alone, access to power, access to a version of life he represented. Ethan ended it the next morning. No argument, no explanation, just clarity. But something inside him didn't reset. After that, it changed quietly, permanently. He stopped asking the question. People in love usually ask, "Does she love me?" and started asking something else. Something colder, more precise. Would she stay if I had nothing? That question stayed with him long after the relationship ended, long after he told himself he had moved on. It followed him into meetings, into dinners, into conversations that should have felt normal, but didn't. Until one night, he picked up his phone and called the only person he trusted enough to tell the truth, his father, Richard Blackwell. Richard was 65, traditional, disciplined. The kind of man who believed respect was earned. Not requested, he built everything Ethan now ran from nothing, brick by brick. Ethan didn't soften the question. "I don't know how to tell anymore," he said. There was a pause on the other end. Not confusion, just patience. How to tell what Richard asked. "If someone actually wants me," Ethan said. "Or just what comes with me." Another pause, longer this time. Then Richard spoke calm, certain, then stopped showing them everything. Ethan frowned slightly. "What does that mean?" "It means," Richard said, "you keep walking into relationships as the full version of yourself. The name, the money, the lifestyle. Of course they respond to that." Ethan leaned back in his chair. He didn't argue because he knew it was true. "So what do I do?" he asked. And this time, Richard didn't hesitate. "You remove it." Silence. Ethan's jaw tightened slightly. "Remove what?" "Everything," Richard said, "that makes it easy to choose you." Ethan looked out the window, Chicago at night, lights stretching across the skyline. Controlled, predictable, unlike what he was feeling. "You're asking me to lie." "I'm asking you," Richard said, steady as ever, "to find out who stays when there's nothing to gain, and if they don't," Ethan asked quietly. "Then you finally know the truth," Richard replied. "No comfort, no reassurance, just truth." Ethan sat there long after the call ended, thinking, replaying every moment, every relationship, every version of himself he had shown to the world. And for the first time, the question in his head had direction, not clean, not perfect, but real. 3 weeks later, Ethan made a decision, a quiet one. No announcements, no headlines. He stepped away from his name, from his company, from everything that made him easy to choose, and became someone else. Ethan Cole, just a man. No power, no advantage, no safety net, because there was something he needed to know, something he couldn't ignore anymore. If he had nothing, would anyone still choose him? 3 weeks after that conversation, Ethan disappeared. Not literally, but in every way that mattered. No press release, no explanation. He stepped out of boardrooms and into a life no one was watching. The name Ethan Blackwell stayed behind. The man who moved into Chicago's South Side was Ethan Cole. No history, no recognition. Just another face in a neighborhood people rarely looked at twice. The apartment was small, 900 square feet, 1 bedroom, thin walls, a window that didn't close all the way in winter. The first night he stood in the middle of the living room and listened not to silence, but to everything else, voices through the walls. A television. Somewhere too loud, footsteps above him, life unfiltered, unhidden. He hadn't heard anything like it in years. His furniture came secondhand, a worn couch with faded fabric, a table with scratches. No one bothered to fix. Nothing matched, nothing impressed, and for the first time in a long time, nothing needed to. His car was different too. A 2012 Ford Focus, over 120,000 miles. The kind of car people parked without thinking twice about it. At first, there was something strangely freeing about it. No expectations, no pressure to perform. No one watching him, because no one cared. He could walk into a grocery store and no one recognized him. Stand in line, wait his turn, be ordinary. And for a while, he thought that was exactly what he needed. His job was simple. Warehouse logistics, $18 an hour, clock in. Clock out, move. Inventory check. Shipments follow instructions. No one asked about his past. No one cared where he came from. To them, he was just another worker. And Ethan leaned into that. He showed up early, kept his head down, did exactly what was asked, and nothing more. No opinions, no corrections, no leadership. Even when he saw mistakes, he stayed quiet, because that was the point, to remove everything that made him different, to see what was left when there was nothing to gain. When there, his routine became predictable. Work, home, cook. Sleep, repeat. He learned to make simple meals. Eggs, rice. Chicken, nothing complicated, nothing expensive. At night, he sat on that worn couch and let the hours pass without distraction. No business calls, no strategy meetings, no constant decisions, just time. And at first it felt like relief, like stepping out of a storm into still air. But stillness does something strange to a person. It gives space for thoughts that don't usually get a chance to speak. And slowly that space filled with something else. Loneliness, not dramatic, not overwhelming, just present in the quiet moments, in the way no one texted him first, in the way conversations at work stayed on the surface. He realized something uncomfortable when you remove everything. People admire about you, you also remove everything that makes them approach you. No one tried to impress him. No one tried to know him, because there was nothing to gain. And for the first time, Ethan understood what invisibility actually felt like. It wasn't peaceful, it was isolating. One afternoon, he stood in line at a small grocery store, basket in hand. Milk, bread, eggs. Nothing more. The cashier barely looked up at her cash. She asked, "Ot," he said. She nodded, finished the transaction. Called the next person. No eye contact, no acknowledgement. Nothing. It wasn't rude. It was just indifferent. And that moment stayed with him longer than it should have, because Ethan realized something. Then something no one had ever told him. Being poor wasn't just about money. It was about how people looked at you. Or didn't. It was about how quickly conversations ended, how rarely they started. It was about being overlooked before you even had the chance to be known. Respect wasn't guaranteed, it was conditional. And without visible success, you had to earn it from the ground up again. That thought unsettled him more than he expected, because for most of his life, respect had followed him automatically. Now, he had to wait for it work, for it prove himself without the shortcuts his name once gave him. And strangely, that part didn't bother him. What bothered him was how quickly the world decided who you were based on what you appeared to have. Weeks turned into months. The routine didn't change, but Ethan did subtle shifts, the way he listened more carefully, the way he noticed things he never paid attention to before, the way he started understanding people not through status, but through effort, through consistency, through small, unnoticed choices. And somewhere in that quiet, repetitive life, something unexpected happened. He stopped thinking about the test every day, not because he forgot, but because something else began to matter more. The question he came here to answer was still there, still waiting. But now it wasn't the only thing on his mind, because for the first time in a long time, Ethan wasn't surrounded by people trying to get something from him. He was surrounded by people who had nothing to gain at all, and that changed the way he saw everything. He just didn't know yet that very soon, someone was about to walk into his life and challenge everything he thought he understood. For the first 2 months, nothing happened. Ethan showed up, did his job, went home. No one noticed him. And that was the point. Until one afternoon. Someone did. Her name was Maya Johnson. She didn't arrive loudly, didn't try to stand out, but people noticed her anyway. Not because she demanded attention, but because things worked when she was around. Maya was 34, 5'6", dark brown skin that caught the light in a way that felt warm, not distant. Her posture was straight, her movements efficient. Nothing wasted, nothing rushed. She was a project coordinator, which in that warehouse meant she was the person holding everything together. Deadlines, schedules, people, problems no one else wanted to deal with. Maya handled them quietly, consistently, without asking for recognition. And after a while, people just expected her to fix things. That was her pattern, reliable, grounded, careful with who she let close, because Maya didn't trust easily either. Not anymore. Her last relationship had ended 2 years earlier. No betrayal, no explosion, just realization. They weren't choosing each other anymore. They were just staying. And that kind of quiet truth left its own kind of scar. So Maya became selective, not cold, just intentional. She noticed Ethan on his 3rd day, not because he stood out, but because he didn't. New people usually tried too hard, talked too much, smiled too quickly. Ethan didn't. He worked, that was it. No performance, no effort to impress, just steady. And something about that felt different. She didn't say anything at first, just watched for 2 weeks. Then one afternoon, she walked into the break room and found him sitting alone, eating a simple sandwich, reading a book, not scrolling his phone, not looking around. Just reading. Maya paused at the door. "That's rare," she said. Ethan looked up. "What is asked. "Someone actually reading in here?" she said, glanced at the book in his hand. "Just passing time," he replied. Maya stepped closer, tilted her head slightly. "What were you reading?" He hesitated just for a second, then turned the cover toward her man's search for meaning. Maya's expression shifted. Not surprised, not impressed, just interested. "Second time?" she asked. Ethan blinked. "You've read it 3, she said simply. He nodded once. "I missed things the first time." Maya smiled faintly. "That's kind of the point." She poured herself coffee, sat across from him. Not too close, not too far. And for the next 20 minutes they talked. Not small talk, not surface-level questions. Real things. It's about meaning. About work. About what it feels like to do something every day and not know if it matters. Ethan noticed something. Maya didn't try to impress him. Didn't soften her opinions. Didn't ask what he did. Before this job, she just engaged, direct, honest, present. And when she stood up to leave, he realized something quietly uncomfortable. He didn't want the conversation to end. That was new. The next day, he saw her again. She nodded. He nodded back, nothing more. But something had shifted. The conversations came slowly. Not every day. Not forced, just moments. She noticed he arrived early. He noticed she stayed late one morning. He started saving the better coffee for her. Not as a gesture, just habit. She noticed, didn't mention it. But the next week she adjusted the lunch schedule. Left an empty slot Tuesday afternoons because she noticed that's when he seemed free. They started eating together once a week, then twice. Then it just became normal. No labels, no expectations, just consistency and something else, comfort, the kind that builds quietly without asking permission. One afternoon they sat outside plastic chairs. Warm air, the sound of trucks moving in the background. Ye looked at him. "You don't talk much," she said. Ethan shrugged slightly. "I talk when it matters." She studied him for a moment. "Or when it's safe?" she asked. That landed more precisely than he expected. Ethan looked away just briefly, maybe both, he admitted. Maya nodded. Didn't push, didn't dig deeper. And that mattered more than anything she could have said, because most people would have. Weeks passed. The pattern held small gestures, small conversations. Nothing dramatic, nothing rushed, and that's exactly why it felt real. Maya didn't treat him differently, didn't try to elevate him, didn't try to fix him. She just met him where he was. And for the first time since he stepped into this life, Ethan felt something shift. Not excitement, not infatuation. Something steadier, something quieter. Trust beginning. But with it came something else. A question. one he had tried to ignore, but couldn't anymore. Was this real? Or was this just another version of the same pattern? Because for the first time, there was actually something to lose, and Ethan wasn't sure if he was ready to risk that. Not everyone ignored Ethan. Some people noticed him for different reasons. Brandon Hayes was one of them. Mid-level manager, white, early 40s. The kind of man who had been in the same position long enough to believe he deserved more. Brandon didn't like uncertainty, didn't like things. He couldn't immediately categorize, and Ethan didn't fit at first. It was subtle, extra tasks. "Hey, Cole, handle this. Stay a little later today, take care of that shipment issue." Things that weren't exactly unfair, but weren't exactly necessary either. Ethan didn't argue, didn't question. He just nodded, and did the work that should have satisfied Brandon. But it didn't, because Ethan didn't react. No frustration, no pushback, no attempt to defend himself, just quiet compliance. And for someone like Brandon, that was unsettling, because people who accept everything usually have nothing to lose. But Ethan didn't feel like that. There was something about him, something controlled, measured. Like he was choosing to stay quiet, not forced into it. So Brandon pushed a little harder. Deadlines. Tightened instructions. Became sharper. Less professional. More personal. One afternoon, Brandon dropped a stack of paperwork onto Ethan's station loud enough for others to hear. "I need all of this reorganized today." Ethan glanced at the pile. "It was at least 2 days of work. I'll get started," he said calmly. Brandon crossed his arms. "No. I need it done today." A pause. Ethan looked at him, not challenging, not submissive, just steady. "I'll do what I can," he replied. That was it. No argument, but something in the way he said it made Brandon's jaw tighten, because it didn't sound like obedience. It sounded like control. Brandon leaned closer. "You do what I tell you. That's your job." Ethan held his gaze for a second, then nodded once, understood, and went back to work. That should have ended it, but it didn't, because moments like that don't go unnoticed. Not by the people paying attention Maya had been watching. Not obviously, not openly, but she saw it the way Brandon spoke to Ethan, the way Ethan responded. Or rather didn't. One evening, after most people had left, she found him still working stacks of files around him. The fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. "You know that's not reasonable, right?" she said. Ethan looked up. "What isn't all of that?" She nodded toward the paperwork that's not one day's work. He shrugged slightly. "I'll get through it." Maya stepped closer, studied his face. "You don't seem annoyed." "I am," he said. "But being annoyed doesn't change the workload." She let out a small breath. "That's not what I mean." He waited. "And that's what made her continue. Most people would push back," she said. "Or at least complain." Ethan leaned back slightly in his chair. "I've learned that sometimes pushing back costs more than it gives." Maya tilted her head. "That sounds like experience." "It is," he said simply. She watched him for a moment longer than usual, because something wasn't adding up. This wasn't how people acted when they had no power. There was no desperation in him, no fear of losing the job, no urgency to prove himself, just calm, too calm. "Ethan," she said quietly. He looked at her. "You're not what you say you are." "Are you?" The question hung there. Not aggressive, not accusing, just direct. Ethan didn't answer immediately. He could have lied. Deflected, changed the subject. But instead he held her gaze and chose his words carefully. "I'm exactly what you see," he said. Which wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the truth either. Maya didn't respond, but her eyes didn't move away. She didn't believe him. Not fully, but she didn't push either. And that restraint stayed with him. After she left, Ethan sat there for a long time. Not working, just thinking. Because that was the moment everything shifted. The test was no longer theoretical. It had a face. Now, a voice, a presence. Maya, and suddenly, the rules didn't feel as simple anymore. Because if he told her the truth, everything would change: the way she looked at him, the way she spoke to him, the way she existed around him. And if he didn't, then every moment they shared carried something unspoken, something unfair. Ethan leaned forward, hands clasped together, and for the first time since he started this, he questioned it. Not the idea, but the cost. Am I protecting myself? He thought quietly, or am I setting something up to fail? That question didn't leave, not that night, not the next day, because the closer he got to Maya, the harder it became to pretend this was just an experiment. It wasn't anymore. It was something real. And real. Things don't survive being tested forever. It started with a simple sentence: I want to show you. Where I live, Ethan said it casually, like it didn't matter. But it did more than anything. He had done in months. Maya looked at him. Not surprised, not hesitant, just thinking, okay. She said that was it. No questions, no hesitation. And somehow that made it harder. The drive there was quiet, not uncomfortable. Just aware, Ethan's hand stayed steady on the wheel, but his thoughts didn't. This was it. The moment he had been preparing for the test. The question he had carried for so long, finally about to be answered. They pulled up in front of the house, small. Faded, the paint chipped in places where no one had bothered to fix it. The porch leaned slightly to one side. A single light above the door flickered, then steadied. Maya stepped out of the car. Looked at the house, not long. Just enough to see it clearly. Ethan watched her, not her words, her face, her eyes. Every small reaction. This was the part that mattered. They walked up the narrow path together. The wood creaked under their steps. Ethan unlocked the door. Held it open. Maya walked in first. Slowly, not dramatic, just present. The house was exactly what it looked like from the outside. Small living room, old couch. A coffee table with a ring stain that never came out. The kitchen floor, slightly lifted at the corners. Everything clean. But worn, used, real. Maya stood in the middle of the room, looked around. Not rushing, not performing. Ethan stayed near the door, waiting, watching. Measuring, this was the moment, the one that always told the truth, a pause. Then Maya turned to him. Is this your first place on your own? She asked. Ethan blinked. That wasn't the reaction he expected. He said, I've moved around. She nodded, looked back at the room again, and then she smiled slightly. I like it, Ethan. Froze, you like it? It's yours, she said simply. That matters more than people think. The words landed harder than anything else could have. No judgment, no hesitation, just acceptance. Ethan sat down slowly on the couch, like his body needed to catch up with what just happened. After a second, Maya sat beside him, close enough to feel real, not close enough to feel forced. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It wasn't heavy. It was easy. You're not what I expected, Ethan said quietly. Maya glanced at him. What did you expect? He hesitated. I don't know, something different? She tilted her head slightly. Did you bring me here to show me your place, or to see how I'd react? The question hit exactly where it was supposed to. Ethan didn't look away. Both, he admitted. Maya nodded once. Okay, she said no. Anger. No accusation. Just understanding. She reached for the book on the table. Turned it over. Read the back. You have anything to drink? She asked. I'll stay for a bit. Ethan stood up. Walked it into the kitchen. Opened the fridge. grabbed 2 bottles. His hands paused for just a second because something felt off, not wrong, just unfamiliar. He wasn't used to this part, the part where things didn't go the way he expected. He came back less than a minute later and stopped. The couch was empty. His chest tightened immediately, that same feeling, the one he knew too well. The quiet drop, the silent conclusion she left. The thought came instantly, like it always did, like it had before. Without warning, without explanation, he stood there, still holding both bottles, then Ethan. Her voice from outside. He turned quickly. "There's a backyard," she called out. "You didn't tell me that." He walked toward the back door, opened it, and there she was, standing in the yard, hands on her hips, looking at something behind the fence. "It's overgrown," she said, "but it's actually nice back here." Ethan stepped outside slowly. "You scared me," he said. Before he could stop himself, Maya turned to him. "Scared you how?" He hesitated, looked down at the bottles in his hands. "Came back and you weren't." He stopped, didn't finish, didn't need to. Maya watched his face, and something changed in her expression. Not pity, not judgment, understanding. "You thought I left," she said softly. Ethan didn't answer. She stepped closer, close enough that her voice didn't need to be loud. "I'm not leaving," she said. "I'm standing in your backyard, looking at something you didn't even notice that hit deeper than anything else." Because she was right. He hadn't noticed it. Not once. Maya pointed toward the edge of the yard. "There used to be a garden here," she said. "You can still see it. Rose bushes, overgrown but alive. Still holding on. If you cleaned it up," she continued, "it would actually be beautiful." Ethan followed her gaze for the first time, really seeing it not as something broken, but as something unfinished. "You'd help me fix it?" he asked. Maya looked at him, smiled just a little. "If you want it to be better," she said, "you don't ignore it, you work on it. Not the house, not the yard." Ethan felt it. That shift, that realization. She wasn't reacting to what he had, or what he didn't. She was responding to who he was, right in front of her. No performance, no advantage, just him. And she stayed not because she had to, not because she didn't know better, but because she chose to. And in that moment, Ethan understood something he hadn't been ready to admit before the test was already failing. Not because she failed it, but because she never needed to take it. It happened on a Tuesday midday, the kind of afternoon where everything feels routine until it isn't. Ethan and Maya were standing just outside the warehouse lunch break. Warm air, the sound of trucks idling in the distance. Ethan had been thinking about something for days. Turning it over again and again, he looked at Maya. There was something he needed to say, something he couldn't keep holding back. "Maya," he started. She looked at him calm. "Present, there's something I need to tell you." The door behind them slammed open hard. "Brandon." His voice cut through the air immediately. Cole Ethan turned slowly. Brandon walked toward him fast, already irritated the shipment reports. "From this morning," he said sharply. "I need them on my desk now." Ethan didn't move. "I'm on my lunch break," he said evenly. "I'll bring them when I get back." Silence, not quiet. Tense, the kind that spreads quickly. Brandon stepped closer. "Too close. You don't decide when you do something," he snapped. "I do." Ethan held his gaze. "No anger. No fear. Just stillness," I said. "I'll bring them after lunch." That was enough. Brandon's jaw tightened, and something in him snapped. His hand shot forward, grabbing the front of Ethan's shirt hard. The air shifted instantly. People nearby stopped moving, stopped talking. "Watch, do you think you can tell me how this works?" Brandon said, his voice low and sharp. "You're a warehouse clerk." "Nothing more. Let him go." Maya's voice clear, steady right beside them. Brandon didn't look at her. "This doesn't concern you," he said. "It does," she replied. "Take your hand off him." There was no hesitation in her tone, no fear, just certainty. Brandon finally glanced at her, annoyed, dismissive. "You want to defend him?" He scoffed. "You think he deserves special treatment?" Maya stepped forward just slightly enough to close the space. "I think no one deserves to be treated like that," she said. The words didn't rise. They landed heavy, precise. Brandon looked around, noticed the attention. Now, phones out, people watching, waiting. He released Ethan's shirt, took a step back. "This isn't over," he said coldly. But before he could say anything else, a voice cut through. Everything. Calm, controlled, and unmistakably powerful. "I believe it is." Everyone turned too. Black SUVs had pulled up without anyone noticing, doors already open. Men in suits stepping aside and walking toward them was Richard Blackwell, Ethan's father. 65, silver hair. Sharp eyes. The kind of presence that didn't need introduction. The moment he stepped forward, the entire atmosphere shifted. The warehouse manager froze. Employees exchanged looks. Something was wrong, or very right. Richard stopped a few feet away, looked at Ethan. First took in the situation. The wrinkled shirt. The tension still hanging in the air, then he spoke. "Are you all right, son?" The word landed. Like impact. Son, not subtle, not hidden. Clear. Immediate. Final, everything stopped. Brandon's face drained of color. Someone behind them whispered. Phones lowered slowly. Because now everyone understood the man they had been treating. Like no one was. Someone, Ethan, didn't move. Didn't react dramatically. "I'm fine," he said quietly. Richard nodded once, then turned to Brandon. "Your name?" he asked. "Brandon Hayes." He stammered. "I didn't know." "No, I'm not asking what." "You knew," Richard said. "I'm asking what you would have done if you did." Brandon opened his mouth. Nothing came out because there was no answer. That worked. Richard took a small step forward, measured, controlled. "No one in this company," he said. Voice steady, but carrying, is treated like that. Not a clerk, not a manager, not anyone. The words spread through the space, clear, unavoidable. He glanced toward the building entrance, effective immediately. He continued, "You are relieved of your duties pending review." Brandon didn't argue, didn't protest. He just stood there for one long second before turning and walking away. The silence that followed felt louder than anything before it. Richard placed a hand briefly on Ethan's shoulder. Not for show, just acknowledgement. Then he stepped back, gave him space, because this moment wasn't about him anymore. It was about her. Ethan turned slowly toward Maya. She was already looking at him. Not shocked. Not confused, just still processing something deeper than surprise. "Ethan," she said quietly. Not anymore. He felt it. That shift, that line being crossed. "Maya, not here," she said. Her voice didn't break, didn't rise, but it carried something else. Disappointment, not loud, not dramatic. Just real. She stepped closer. Just enough to be heard. "I had a feeling." She said, "I just didn't think you'd choose to do it like this." Those words hit harder than anything Brandon had done, because they were true, and they weren't angry, which made them worse. Ethan opened his mouth, but nothing came out because there was nothing he could say that would fix what just happened. Maya held his gaze for a second longer, then turned and walked back inside. No scene, no drama, just distance. And suddenly, for the first time since this began, Ethan understood something clearly. The test was over and he wasn't the one who passed it. Maya didn't make a scene. She didn't raise her voice, didn't demand an explanation that would have been easier. Instead, she walked away quietly. And that silence stayed with Ethan longer than any argument could have. He didn't follow her, didn't call out her name because deep down, he knew this wasn't something he could fix in a moment. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a choice. His choice that night. Ethan sat alone in the small house, the same one he had brought her to, the same one that had felt different just days before. Now it felt empty, not because she wasn't there, but because he finally saw it for what it was. A setup, not a home. A test, not a life. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands clasped. And for the first time since this began, he didn't try to justify it, didn't defend the idea, didn't explain it away. He just sat with it. The truth. I turned something real into something conditional. The thought didn't come all at once. It unfolded. Slow, clear, unavoidable. Maya didn't leave because of the house. She didn't leave because of the lie she left. Because he never gave her the chance to choose freely. He decided the rules controlled the conditions, watched her like she was something to evaluate, and expected her to never feel it. That realization cut deeper than anything else, because it wasn't about what she did. It was about what he had done. Ethan leaned back, closed his eyes, and let that settle. No distractions. No escape. Just honesty. The next morning, he called his father Richard. Answered on the second ring. She was right. Ethan said no introduction, no context. Just truth. I know, Richard replied calmly. Ethan exhaled slowly. You could have told me that before. I could have, Richard said, but you wouldn't have believed me. Silence, because that was true too. Ethan ran a hand through his hair. I thought I was protecting myself, he said. You were, Richard replied, but you were also protecting yourself from something real. That landed hard, because that's exactly what had happened. Ethan had built a system to avoid being hurt, and in doing so, he created something that couldn't be real from the start. I made her prove something she never agreed to, Ethan said quietly. And she passed before I even started measuring. Richard didn't respond immediately. Then you know what you have to do. Ethan looked around the room. The couch, the table. The quiet, yeah, he said, I do. But knowing and doing were not the same thing. Days passed. Then a week, Ethan didn't call. Maya didn't text, didn't show up uninvited, because this time he didn't want to take another choice away from her. If she wanted space, he would give it completely. No pressure, no expectation. Just respect. And that was harder than anything else, because for the first time he wasn't in control of the outcome. He had to wait and accept whatever came next across the city. Maya sat in her apartment quiet, thinking, not replaying the moment in the warehouse, not the reveal, not the shock, because there wasn't any she had known. Not everything, but enough. There were signs. The way Ethan carried himself, the way he didn't react to pressure, the way he never seemed afraid. That wasn't someone with nothing. That was someone choosing to have nothing. And she stayed anyway. That was the part that kept coming back to her. I chose him. Before I knew, she thought. Thought not his money, not his name. Him. And that made everything more complicated, because the lie hurt, but the truth underneath it was still real. The way he listened. The way he showed up. The way he never tried to be more than what he was in front of her. Except he wasn't. And that mattered not because he was rich, but because he didn't trust her enough to let her decide. Days passed, then one evening, Maya picked up her phone. Stared at his number, didn't call immediately, because this wasn't about impulse. It was about clarity, finally. She pressed dial. Ethan answered on the first ring. Hello? A pause. It's me, she said. He sat down instantly. I know. Silence. Then I need to say something, Maya continued. And I need you to listen without interrupting, Kay, he said. What you did was wrong, she said, not harsh, not emotional, just clear, not who you are, not your money. The way you chose for me, the way you set it up, that was wrong. Ethan didn't defend himself, didn't explain. He said quietly, You're right. A small pause, then Maya's voice softened. But I also need you to know something. Ethan didn't move. I knew something didn't make sense, she said. I just didn't know what. And I stayed anyway. That hit harder than anything else. I chose you, before I had the full picture, and that matters. Ethan closed his eyes briefly, 'cause that was the one thing he had been too afraid to trust. Where do we go from here? He asked quietly. Another pause, not uncertain. Just thoughtful, somewhere honest, she said. No test, no performance, just real. Ethan nodded, even though she couldn't see it. I can do that, he said. Maya replied gently. You have to be that silence again. But this time, it felt different. Can I see you? He asked, a breath on the other end. She said, You can. No grand setup, no dramatic reunion, just a door opening, and two people choosing to start again. Not from a lie, not from a test, but from something much harder, the truth. Some people think love is something you test, something you measure, something you prove. Ethan used to believe that too. He thought if someone stayed when there was nothing to gain, then it was real. But he was wrong, because real love doesn't begin with doubt. It begins with trust. Maya didn't stay because she passed a test. She stayed because she chose him before she knew everything. And that's what Ethan failed to understand. When you turn love into a test, you don't reveal the truth. You change it. You make something simple complicated, something real, conditional. And in doing that, you risk losing the very thing you were trying to protect. In the end, Ethan didn't learn how to test love. He learned something harder, something most people only understand too late, that the right person doesn't need to prove anything, and if you don't trust them from the beginning, no answer will ever feel enough.